Hey, it's your old pal Lucid Stew again. In this video, we're going back to the Chicago Hub network to take a closer look at one of the routes within the larger system that I liked in my last video, Chicago to Indianapolis. Full disclosure, I'm not a civil engineer, urban planner, or a transportation specialist, although I was pretty good at SimCity back in the day. Even though I have done research in these matters, this is just for fun and to keep high-speed rail conversation progressing amongst us, the great unwashed. Let's jump right back into Chicago and Union Station. This might look familiar from the Chicago Hub Network video. If you haven't seen it, check out the card above. To facilitate high-speed rail, Union Station will need at least 2 tracks tunneled to it under Clinton Street for 1.5 miles. These would also connect to Ogilvie Transportation Center. In my opinion, the best way to get to those tunnels from the south is another set of tunnels from the Metro Electric right-of-way. These would measure a couple more miles. An analog we have for all this work is the Baltimore Penn Station redevelopment that includes the Frederick Douglass tunnels I talked about in the last Stew's News at a little more than $6 billion combined. This is about 3 miles south of Chicago Union Station, and I like this as a site for a second core station for a couple of reasons. One, to take pressure off of Union Station. Another reason, there is a huge mixed-use redevelopment project underway trackside here called Bronzeville Lakefront. Lastly, a station here would be able to act as a northern terminus if the Union Station work were delayed or funding was short. My basic station idea would be to have a core metro station, 1 or 2 stations farther out from the core, and then in between stations at smaller cities with development potential. Another spot I like is called Woodlawn. This neighborhood is rough around the edges but has some great amenities nearby. The main street through the area has many empty lots and a lot of potential to transform into a vital, walkable neighborhood anchor. There are about 40 total acres to redevelop on small to medium-sized lots within a half mile of a potential station where a metro station currently exists. A little further south is our first routing decision and engineering obstacle where Metro Electric tracks cross under those of Norfolk Southern. By the way, I'm pronouncing the L on purpose to avoid any issues with YouTube. The angle at which these cross is advantageous for hopping onto the Norfolk Southern right-of-way. This could be accomplished with minimal disturbance at low speed, but we'd like to maintain 90 to 100 miles per hour through town if possible. As a result, I would opt for a larger curve to accommodate our presumed speed limit on shared track of 110 miles per hour. Lots of nearby remediation potential for affected landowners and tenants, as we have to assume environmental justice will be a big part of a project this size. It would be nice to help businesses stay in the community and contribute to the success of places that our route traverses. That's the point of the entire thing, after all. Let's talk about curves for a moment. I lifted the following graphic from a dormant blog about high-speed rail in Australia. I then converted to imperial to infuriate the world, and I also simplified things to make it easier on everyone so it balances out. But this is what I'm using to figure out if things are straight enough and how fast our theoretical train can go. One reason I picked the Norfolk Southern right-of-way is because it has room for 8 tracks. Norfolk Southern has at least 4 in most places. It looks like they're using some of the space as an access road, and some of the right-of-way is also taken up by high-tension power lines. However, the point is it has space to add a couple more tracks without having to destroy a bunch of stuff. The next major obstacle is the crossing of the Calumet River. A couple of things make this a tricky crossing. The first is the existing lift bridges, which are ancient. There are 3 lift bridges, one of which Norfolk Southern uses, and also a rotting bascule bridge that I don't have a good picture of. It's not clear if any of these could be removed or if they would need to be circumvented. What we don't want is to use or build a lift bridge here. The other issue is that the Calumet River hosts a port slightly upstream, and any span needs to get out of the way or provide 125 feet of navigational clearance. This brings up the matter of grade, since we'll need to rise 125 feet to get over this river. This chart shows horizontal distance needed to attain a given rise at 1% grade. At angles, this small progression is nearly linear, so 2% is about half these amounts, and 4% would be half again. With a 650-foot main span and assuming a 2% grade, we're looking at about 2 miles of structure to get up and over this gap. The closest analog I could easily find is the planned Susquehanna bridge replacement on the NEC. This is a 4-track dual bridge structure about 5,000 feet long, mostly over open water. Cost on that is $1.5 billion. We're talking about 110 miles per hour in this part, so you might be able to increase grade to 3.5%, which would be closer to the profile of the adjacent Chicago Skyway Bridge at about 1.25 miles. About 6 miles to the southeast, we have another water crossing for the Indiana Harbor Canal. Based on another structure, it looks like clearance here is 100 feet, but there are some other crossings complicating the situation. Probably doable with a 1.5 mile structure, about 3/4 scale of the proposed Calumet River Bridge. With these two bridges, it is apparent I underestimated the cost of this route by at least $1 billion, but it's still a relatively good deal at 5% more. The consolation is that you get a free roller coaster ride in this section. As we continue south, we approach Gary Chicago International Airport. This is the Chicago area's third seldom used airport, but it is figured this airport will see a lot of growth, so it might be worth connecting to at some point. I have diverging tracks to represent a couple of options. I've stopped labeling the right-of-way because even with a rail map, I'm not sure who owns what, and we'll be getting away from rail rights-of-way shortly. Let's take a look at a route directly through Gary, Indiana first. The tracks from the north are at surface level and grade separated. After that, you're looking at 17 at-grade crossings. Simplest solution is to elevate the tracks and eliminate some crossings, like the lines through Chicago. Gary is halfway urban forest, so you could conceivably bulldoze a good chunk near any station for massive redevelopment. The shaded portion here is about 220 acres. To give a sense of scale, here's the same area superimposed on downtown Chicago. There are many nearby medium-sized lots available as remediation for the 700 or 800 people displaced. However, this isn't the 50s or 60s, and generally projects like this don't fly anymore. As a result, I elected to go around Gary, as otherwise going through Gary with no stop would only produce negatives. There are a couple of half-mile radius highway curves that need straightening and a minor challenge with high tension lines that might need some rerouting, but 110 miles per hour through this area is doable. It looks scary, but from another angle it's not as bad, and we've accomplished the desired link with our Interstate 65 right-of-way between metros. Just south of there, a few more things to talk about before I start generalizing, because in the rural parts the issues tend to be either track straightening because the highway curve is too tight, or what to do with an intersection. In this graphic we have both. To keep us at 110 miles per hour, 6 houses would need to be demolished to accommodate the broader curve. The demolition near the bottom is some houses and part of a self-storage business that are too close to the interstate to accommodate the tracks. On the subject of freeway intersections, let's take a look at some of the things Brightline did on their route to Orlando. I call this one around and through. This has the added bonus of being confined by frontage roads. Box culvert through the berm next to the ramps, easy peasy. Over and through, rise on berms, fly over bridges, berm back down to ground level. That's likely what would happen with our example intersection. Around and over. Given the space, this avoids the mess of the intersection with a high-speed curve and crosses over one of the approaches at a reasonably narrow spot. This type will be limited to places without a lot of development. Under and through the berm for the road flyover, lifting the on and off ramps on berms, and then bridges for those over the tracks. Notice this type is for roads flying over highways, and the over and through kind is highway flying over the road. Another around and over type, this time on a terminating interchange, but notice that this wouldn't fly if the tracks were on the other side of the freeway. You'd probably be doing an over and through, but this has less aerial work, so probably a lot cheaper. Here we have a right-of-way width of 100 feet. That's probably a minimum for double track of any significant speed. You can also see the median would be a tight squeeze. That's not always the case. Some medians are very broad, but a lot of interstate rights-of-way don't have any median beyond the concrete divider. Now let's take a look at some California high-speed rail structures. Box viaduct conveying the high-speed rail tracks from one side of freight tracks to the other. It's not that you can't use freight rail rights-of-way out in the open, but you'll need some separation, and combined the two cut a pretty wide swath. Also, freight through rural tends to run through a small town every 10 or 15 miles, and your high-speed rail will need to go around by cutting new right-of-way. Two-lane road up onto berms and flying over the high-speed rail tracks with a bridge, presumably not going straight up and over due to the subdivision being built in the lower left-hand corner, but just a reminder that you can adjust infrastructure around the high-speed rail right-of-way instead of the other way around. This is the Hanford Viaduct. It is 4 tracks wide, flies over freight rail, and at least 2 roadways on new right-of-way. It will also hold a station, is a couple of miles from anything significant, and is precisely the type of thing I want to avoid. I wanted to show this because the Midwestern part of the country loves creative intersections. Here they're eliminating a couple of left turns with extra on-ramps. Those ruin our day and keep us from jamming box culverts through everything with an under and through approach. Instead, we probably need to rise up 40 feet and fly over everything. Might also chop a few feet off a parking lot here and there. The freeway can look deceptively elevated in these overhead Indiana satellite shots, but from ground level it's apparent you'd only need a 6 to 8 foot retaining wall if it were necessary to push right up against a property line. This is Merrillville, Indiana, at the intersection of Interstate 65 and US 30. If we can't put a station in Gary, I like one here. This is 35 miles from Union Station on the far southeastern edge of Greater Chicago. The general area is home to around 75,000 people. Thousands of acres of land within 5 miles that could be developed. The area doesn't have a proper core, so why not put one here around a high-speed rail station? Has the potential to bring some balance to a very suburban area. Here's an example of our right-of-way needing to break away from the freeway to maintain high speed. This represents a little more than 3 miles of track around a hospital. Portions of about 10 properties would need to be acquired. 2 bridges and a 1,000-foot viaduct over local roads would be necessary. No structures need to be demolished. This is one of the more extreme examples between Chicago and Indianapolis. Most others can be handled with less than half as much new right-of-way. We're now about 70 miles closer to Indianapolis, coming into the Lafayette, Indiana area, which is home to about 125,000 people. On the northern outskirts, we run into an issue with some curves while crossing a road, freight rail, and a creek. This solution involves about a dozen properties with demolition of a couple of structures. The northwest half would be ground level, the remainder would rise up and fly over everything else. The new curves would be 150 to 170 miles per hour, which is okay because we'll be slowing to 110 miles per hour for Lafayette, 3 miles to the south. This is the intersection of Interstate 65 and South Street on the edge of Lafayette. Things get a little tight in this part, which is most easily remedied by closing a small residential road and moving another road 20 or 30 feet further away from the freeway right-of-way. Here's my grand vision for Lafayette. The tracks diverge from the freeway for about 5 miles to run through nearly a square mile of potential development. Lots of surrounding amenities, including 3 medical centers within a mile, a Subaru manufacturing plant a mile and a half away, and Purdue University is 5 miles distant. A couple of 150 mile per hour curves toward the freeway to the southeast, and then back to 200 miles per hour. This is Lebanon, Indiana, area population about 20,000. The freeway has a giant high-speed curve we can go through at 200 miles per hour with minimal adjustment. I also like it for a station. Wait, what? Please consider that this city is only 25 miles from central Indianapolis and is about 5 miles from being absorbed by the burbs. A station here would be ahead of the curve as an outer metro location. Coming into Indianapolis and things in the Interstate 65 right-of-way get pretty tight. This is close to correct scale on the overlay, so the shaded portions of these parking lots would need to be demolished. We can probably just squeeze by any close buildings. We cross over the freeway to avoid this cemetery that comes within 40 feet of the freeway on the west side. As a result, we have to realign the frontage road on the east side. I want to talk briefly about this idea of the freeway right-of-way and the occasionally tempting freeway median. Both vary in width. Here, Interstate 65 is 200 feet wide and the median is 50 feet. 50 feet is just barely wide enough to fit 2 train tracks on a straight. Each side of the right-of-way has 25 feet to spare, but this can be reasonably expanded to 40 if need be. One option is to use the median for a viaduct, but this is a relatively expensive option. If we want breathing room in other ways, let's look at some options beyond just the median. 1 track in the median and 1 track on one side of an expanded right-of-way. 1 track on either side of an expanded right-of-way. The drawback of these options is the complication caused by freeway transitions and ramps. The nuclear option of moving the freeway lanes to make room for the tracks side by side, you'd probably only want to do this as a last resort. A smaller median is left open to afford separation and leave room for ramps. All of these concepts and configurations eventually get us to a point where I can combine my 2 fascinations, high-speed rail and dead malls. Say hello to Lafayette Square Mall, potential high-speed rail train station and suburban mixed redevelopment project. The freeway situation is far too complicated to straighten, so we're settling for 90 miles per hour within a couple of miles of this station. The mall property is more than 100 acres, and best I can tell, some recent redevelopment plans fell through, so it's ready. A transition from the Interstate 65 right-of-way to a CSX spur line is tight. That could be loosened some with the demolition of a strip mall. If that doesn't do it for you, how's this one grab you? 4 miles from downtown, that CSX spur runs right by Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Put the station there. Redevelop the golf course into walkable mixed use and call it Motor City. I'm actually serious. Between Interstate 65 and Indianapolis Union Station, this CSX right-of-way would need to be grade separated and widened to facilitate dedicated electric passenger tracks while retaining existing freight capabilities. In this example, 5 crossings need separating and 6 properties would need to be demolished, which isn't bad for 1.25 miles considering the location. The final mile into Indianapolis Union Station is difficult. I think the simplest way to handle it is to rise up on viaduct. From the road bridge over the White River, that would look something like this. The tracks would stay elevated into the station to allow navigation over everything between here and there. This would widen to 4 tracks into the station and fly over these parking lots with minimized footprint. There are ample redevelopment opportunities near the station, including multiple parking lots. A recently completed urban redevelopment project called Cityway is 2 blocks away. There are some major draws within walking distance like Lucas Oil Stadium, home of the Colts, Gainbridge Fieldhouse, home of the Pacers, and Monument Circle. And with that, we have successfully constructed high-speed rail to Indianapolis from Chicago. In my Chicago Hub Network video, I estimated Chicago to Cincinnati to cost $24 billion. I think you can add a couple of billion to that due to the extensive bridge and viaduct work. Still not bad. This is also able to run faster than I anticipated, so I think 70 minutes is realistic for this roughly 180-mile route. I really enjoyed making this video. I'd like to do more about immediate US city pairs with metros over 1 million population. If you have any city pair suggestions or opinions about this video, or just high-speed rail in general, please leave them in the comments. If you like this video, don't forget to give a thumbs up. My next video will be about the Empire High-Speed Rail Corridor in New York, and then Stu's News after that. But that's all for now. Until next time, I'll see you on that big beautiful freeway.